The morning mist clung to the Rocky Mountains as Samantha Rivers adjusted her worn flight jacket and walked toward the hangar that would become her new battleground. At 29, she looked unremarkable among the cocky pilots and fresh-faced trainees. Average height, lean build, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that revealed nothing of the impossible rescues she'd flown in conditions that would terrify seasoned veterans. What the other trainees didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that this quiet woman had pulled 50 souls from certain death in places where helicopters weren't supposed to fly, in weather that grounded entire air forces, and under fire that would make combat pilots think twice. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous pilot in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Wilderness Rescue Training Institute stretched across a valley in northwestern Montana, its collection of hangars and training buildings dwarfed by the towering peaks that surrounded them like silent sentinels. The facility was designed to push pilots to their absolute limits, preparing them for the kind of rescues that happened when everything else had already failed. It was here that the military, Coast Guard, and civilian rescue services sent their people to learn how to fly in conditions that killed the unprepared. Samantha Rivers shouldered her gear bag and surveyed the complex with eyes that automatically cataloged wind patterns, terrain features, and potential landing zones. The habit was so ingrained she barely noticed herself doing it anymore. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another trainee getting her bearings on the first day of an intensive 6-month program. Her roommate assignment led her to Building C, where she found Hannah Kim already unpacking her belongings with military precision. Hannah was 24, a former Air Force transport pilot, with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. "You must be Sam," Hannah said, extending a hand. Hannah Kim, formerly of McCord Air Force Base. "Fair warning, I'm an early riser and I talk too much when I'm nervous." Sam shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the way Hannah's eyes quickly assessed her. "Sam Rivers, and I don't mind early mornings." Hannah laughed. "Good, because Reveille here is at 0500. They say the mountain weather changes fastest at dawn, so that's when we'll be doing most of our emergency scenario training." She gestured toward the window where the peaks were barely visible through the morning fog. "You ever fly in mountains before?" "Some," Sam replied, beginning to unpack her own gear with the same methodical precision Hannah had displayed. What she didn't mention was that she'd flown rescue missions in the Hindu Kush, the Andes, and mountain ranges whose names appeared on no public maps. The dormitory common area buzzed with the nervous energy of 36 pilots from various backgrounds: military, civilian rescue services, emergency medical helicopter crews, and a handful of corporate pilots looking to transition into rescue work. Sam moved through the introductions with practiced efficiency, offering little beyond her name and a vague reference to previous government service. Eddie Morales, the facility's chief maintenance supervisor, watched the new arrivals from his position near the coffee station. A graying man in his 50s with hands permanently stained by hydraulic fluid and aviation fuel, Eddie had been keeping rescue aircraft flying for over 20 years. He'd developed an eye for reading pilots, and something about the quiet woman unpacking near the window caught his attention. It wasn't anything obvious. She moved like the others, spoke politely when addressed, showed appropriate respect for the facility and its reputation, but there was something in the way she carried herself, a stillness that Eddie associated with pilots who'd seen real action. Most new arrivals displayed either nervous excitement or overconfident bravado. This one showed neither. She displayed the calm of someone who'd already been tested and knew exactly what she was capable of. "First time at WRTI?" Eddie asked, approaching with a steaming mug of coffee. "Yes, sir. Looking forward to the training." Eddie studied her face, noting the way her eyes briefly scanned the room before returning to him. "We get all types here. Some think they're already hot shots, others are scared they won't measure up. You don't seem to fit either category." "I'm here to learn," Sam replied simply. Eddie nodded slowly. In 2 decades of watching pilots come through the program, he'd learned that the ones who said the least often had the most to hide. What kind of flying have you done before? Emergency services, some military contract work. It was technically true, though it barely scratched the surface of her actual experience. Sam had been part of a classified rescue unit that operated in denied territories, pulling out everything from downed pilots to extraction teams that had gone silent behind enemy lines. Her service record was so classified that even she couldn't access most of it anymore. The sound of loud laughter echoed from across the common area, drawing both Sam's and Eddie's attention. A group of 4 male pilots had claimed the largest table near the windows, their voices carrying clearly as they discussed their impressive backgrounds and predictions about who would wash out of the program first. Chase Brennan sat at the center of the group, his broad shoulders and movie star smile making him the natural focal point. At 6'2", with perfectly styled hair and the kind of confident bearing that commanded attention, Chase was the son of Marcus Brennan, founder of Brennan Flight Systems, one of the largest helicopter manufacturers in North America. He'd grown up around aircraft and carried himself like someone who'd never doubted his place in any cockpit. Beside him sat Nolan Pierce, wiry and sharp-featured, a former corporate pilot whose family owned a chain of luxury ski resorts. His dark eyes constantly scanned the room like a predator looking for his next target. Garrett Stone completed their inner circle, stocky and broad-shouldered, a former police helicopter pilot whose aggressive flying style had earned him both commendations and reprimands in equal measure. Logan Webb hung slightly back from the others, quieter but equally arrogant, constantly documenting everything with his phone camera. "Look at this group," Chase was saying, his voice pitched to carry across the room. "Half these people look like they've never seen real weather, let alone flown in it. I give it 2 weeks before we're down to maybe 20 pilots." Nolan laughed, tapping his coffee cup against the table. "Did you see that guy from the Forest Service? Asked the instructor if there were weight restrictions for rescue scenarios? Weight restrictions, like we're flying passenger jets instead of pulling people out of disasters." Their laughter drew attention from across the room. Several other pilots turned to listen, some joining in the amusement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young pilot named Iris Chang, barely 23 and fresh out of civilian flight school, felt her face flush red. She was one of the smallest people in the program, having just barely met the physical requirements for the intensive training ahead. Garrett leaned back in his chair, his voice booming across the common area. "My ex-girlfriend could probably outfly half these people, and she's afraid of heights. I don't know what they're thinking, letting just anyone into a program like this." Sam continued organizing her gear, but Eddie noticed the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. He'd seen that look before, the controlled reaction of someone hearing something they disagreed with but choosing not to respond. Yet. Iris Chang sat 2 tables away, her hands trembling slightly as she pretended to read through her training materials. At 5'2" and barely 120 pounds, she'd fought her entire life to be taken seriously as a pilot. Her father had been a helicopter rescue pilot in South Korea before immigrating to the United States, and she'd grown up dreaming of following in his footsteps. Hearing Chase and his friends dismiss her before training had even begun felt like a punch to the stomach. "Just ignore them," whispered the pilot beside her, a Coast Guard veteran named Marcus Torres. "They're trying to psych people out before we even start flying." But Iris couldn't ignore it. She'd heard variations of the same dismissive comments throughout flight school, during her civilian flight training, and from every instructor who thought she looked too young or too small to handle a real aircraft. Watching Chase's group mock other pilots felt like watching her own family dismiss her dreams all over again. The silence in the common area stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Sam remained motionless, her gray eyes fixed on Chase's face with an intensity that made several nearby pilots shift uncomfortably in their seats. She had perfected this stillness during countless hours of flying in hostile territory, learning that sometimes the most powerful response was no response at all. Chase's confidence wavered for just a moment under her unwavering stare,
but Nolan quickly stepped beside him, breaking the tension with forced laughter. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue?" His voice carried across the room, drawing nervous chuckles from some tables while others remained dead silent. Garrett moved to Sam's left side, completing a loose triangle around her. His broad shoulders were crossed, and he wore the expression of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't intimidate into submission. "Maybe she didn't hear you, Chase. Some people need things explained real simple." Logan hung back slightly, but his presence added weight to the group's intimidation factor. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while actually positioning it to record whatever happened next. Several other pilots noticed and began reaching for their own devices, sensing that this moment would be worth documenting. Sam's peripheral vision caught the movement. Phones appearing, fingers hovering over record buttons, faces turning toward the confrontation. She'd been recorded before, but those videos were classified, locked away in files that would never see daylight. This would be different. This would spread. From her table near the back, Iris Chang watched with growing anxiety. The scene reminded her of her flight school cafeteria, where bigger personalities would corner the quiet ones just because they could. Her friend Marcus noticed her distress and whispered, "Should we get an instructor?" Iris shook her head, her eyes never leaving Sam. Something about the way the woman stood, perfectly balanced, completely calm despite being outnumbered, reminded Iris of her father when he'd catch her practicing emergency procedures in their garage. "Wait," she whispered back. "I think she can handle this." Chase took another step closer, now within arm's reach of Sam. "I asked you a question. You think you belong here with real pilots?" His voice had dropped lower, more menacing, playing to the audience that had formed around them. Eddie had moved closer under the pretense of refilling his coffee. His military experience told him this situation was balanced on a knife's edge. The woman being confronted showed none of the typical signs of intimidation. No backing away, no defensive posturing, no attempts to de-escalate. Instead, she displayed the kind of calm that came from absolute confidence in one's abilities. Nolan decided to escalate things further. He reached for a water bottle from a nearby table and, maintaining eye contact with Sam, slowly poured the cold liquid onto her boots. "Oops," he said with mock concern. "Looks like you made a mess." The water splashed across Sam's feet and spread across the floor in a small puddle. Several pilots gasped at the blatant disrespect, while others laughed nervously. Sam looked down at her boots, then slowly knelt to wipe them with a napkin from a nearby table. From his corner position, Captain Nash leaned forward slightly. She had seen this kind of harassment before, the systematic humiliation designed to break someone's spirit. But something about this woman's response bothered her. She wasn't reacting like a typical victim. Her movements were too controlled, too precise. It reminded her of the way elite operators moved just before they took action. As Sam knelt, Garrett saw an opportunity to assert dominance. "Maybe you should stay down there where you belong," he said, placing his heavy boot uncomfortably close to her hand. "Seems like the right position for you." A female instructor named Lieutenant Sarah Cross had entered the common area just as the confrontation began. She stood near the entrance, observing the scene with growing anger. Sarah had endured similar treatment during her early career, when being a woman in aviation meant constantly proving yourself worthy of respect. She recognized the dynamic immediately. 4 male pilots using their size and numbers to humiliate a female peer. But something about this particular woman gave Sarah pause. The way she knelt wasn't submissive. It was purposeful, like she was assessing the situation from a different angle. Sarah had worked with enough special operations personnel to recognize certain behavioral patterns, and this pilot displayed several of them. Sam stood slowly, the soaked napkin crumpled in her fist. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the recording phones, the anticipatory faces, the mix of sympathy and excitement in the crowd. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet the people in the back had to strain to hear her. "You should move," she said simply, looking directly at Garrett. The big man laughed, a sound that echoed off the common area walls. "Are you gonna cry about it to the instructors?"
Chase stepped even closer, his chest nearly touching Sam's shoulder. "Let me make this real clear for you, little girl. This isn't a place for weaklings. If you can't handle a little water on your boots, maybe you should reconsider your career choices." The room's energy had shifted to something electric and dangerous. Iris found herself standing up from her table without realizing it, her heart pounding as she watched the confrontation escalate. Other female pilots were similarly affected, some angry, some afraid, all recognizing that this moment was about more than just one person being bullied. Logan, still filming, discreetly whispered to a pilot beside him, "This is going viral for sure. Look how pathetic she looks." But Eddie saw something different. As a former military maintenance chief, he'd learned to read body language in combat situations. The woman wasn't displaying fear or submission. She was displaying the coiled readiness of a predator preparing to strike. Her weight distribution, the positioning of her feet, the way her hands hung loosely at her sides, it all screamed trained fighter. Captain Nash began moving through the crowd, her instructor instincts telling her to intervene before the situation escalated beyond verbal harassment. But she was still several tables away, and the dynamic in the room was shifting rapidly. Nolan, emboldened by the audience and his friend's support, decided to make physical contact. He reached out to push Sam's shoulder, intending to make her stumble backward. "Time for you to learn your place," he said with a sneer. The moment his fingers made contact with Sam's flight jacket, everything changed. Her hand moved faster than most people could track, clamping down on Nolan's wrist with surgical precision. Her grip found the exact pressure point that sent shooting pain up his arm, causing his face to contort in shock and agony. The cocky expression melted away, replaced by confusion and the beginning of fear. "I said move," Sam repeated, her voice still quiet but now carrying an undertone of steel that made several pilots take involuntary steps backward. Chase's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. His friends were supposed to be intimidating this woman, not the other way around. "Let him go right now, or this is going to get a lot worse for you," he threatened, moving to grab Sam's arm. The common area had gone completely silent except for Nolan's sharp intake of breath as Sam maintained her grip on Nolan's wrist. Phones were recording from multiple angles now, capturing every moment of what was quickly becoming the most dramatic confrontation in the facility's recent history. Eddie set down his coffee cup completely, his military training kicking into high gear. He could see the situation was about to explode, and something told him the 4 male pilots were about to learn a lesson they weren't prepared for. Captain Nash pushed through the crowd more urgently now, but she was still far away to intervene. All she could do was watch as the tension in the room reached a breaking point, with every person present sensing that what happened next would change everything.
Nolan's eyes widened as Sam's grip on his wrist tightened incrementally. The pain was unlike anything he'd experienced, precise, controlled, and absolutely inescapable. His earlier bravado crumbled as he realized this wasn't the typical scuffle between pilots. The woman holding his wrist possessed knowledge and skill that came from somewhere far beyond basic flight training. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Chase snarled, reaching for Sam's shoulder to force her to release his friend. But as his hand approached, Sam's free arm moved in a blur, intercepting his wrist with the same surgical precision she'd used on Nolan. Now she held both men, their arms twisted at angles that sent sharp warnings through their nervous systems. Garrett and Logan exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly realizing that their numerical advantage might not mean what they thought it would. From across the room, Iris watched in fascination and growing awe. The quiet woman who'd been accepting humiliation moments before had transformed into something entirely different. Her movements were economical, professional, deadly. Iris had grown up watching her father practice emergency maneuvers, and she recognized genuine expertise when she saw it. Eddie found himself nodding with professional respect. He'd seen special operations personnel in action during his military service, and this woman displayed the same controlled lethality that marked the best of them. Whatever her background, she'd been trained by people who understood violence as a precise tool rather than a blunt instrument. "Release them immediately," Chase managed to gasp, his voice strained as Sam's grip sent waves of pain up his arm. "You're assaulting fellow trainees." Sam's voice remained eerily calm. "I'm defending myself against 4 individuals who chose to surround, humiliate, and physically assault me." She spoke just loud enough for the recording phones to pick up every word. "Any instructor reviewing this footage will see exactly what happened and in what order." The strategic thinking behind her response wasn't lost on Captain Nash, who had finally pushed close enough to see the confrontation clearly. This wasn't panic or lucky reflexes. This was someone who understood the importance of controlling the narrative. The woman had allowed herself to be recorded being victimized, creating an unassailable legal and disciplinary position before taking action. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the common area, a pilot named Marcus Torres was having his own revelation. He'd been watching the entire confrontation unfold, and something about Sam's movements triggered memories from his Coast Guard service. He'd worked with rescue swimmers who moved with that same fluid precision, but even they hadn't displayed the tactical awareness this woman possessed. Marcus leaned over to another Coast Guard veteran, Chief Petty Officer Angela Reed. "You seeing this?" he whispered urgently. Angela nodded, her experienced eyes studying Sam's technique. "That's not civilian training. Hell, that's not even standard military training. Look at how she's controlling both of them simultaneously, while maintaining perfect leverage while keeping awareness of the other two threats." Their conversation was overheard by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a flight surgeon who'd been assigned to the facility to monitor pilots' psychological fitness. Jennifer had worked with enough combat veterans to recognize certain behavioral patterns, and everything about this confrontation screamed advanced tactical training. "The restraint is what gets me," Jennifer murmured to Angela. "She could probably break both their wrists without breaking a sweat, but she's applying just enough pressure to control them. That's the kind of precision that comes from extensive field experience." Across the room, Hannah Kim stood frozen near the coffee station, watching her new roommate with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Sam's explanation of some emergency service work suddenly seemed like a massive understatement. Hannah had flown transport missions with special operations teams, and she'd seen operators move with similar controlled intensity. Eddie approached the confrontation slowly, his maintenance uniform giving him an excuse to move through the crowd. As he got closer, he could hear Sam's controlled breathing, see the way her eyes continuously tracked all four threats while maintaining perfect situational awareness of the room around her. 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this, he muttered to himself. A young pilot named Kevin Park, fresh out of civilian flight school, had been recording the incident on his phone. But as he watched Sam's demonstration of skill, he found himself lowering the device. Something about what he was witnessing felt too significant for social media. This isn't entertainment. That woman is... I don't know what she is, but she's not what any of us thought. Sarah nodded, her own flight instructor background helping her recognize the signs. Look at her breathing. Look at how she's positioned. This isn't someone who got lucky or took a self-defense class. This is someone who's been in situations where hesitation meant death.
Logan, still hanging back with his phone ready, began to sense that he and his friends had made a serious miscalculation. The woman they'd targeted wasn't the vulnerable newcomer they'd assumed. She was something else entirely, something dangerous. Captain Nash finally reached the edge of the confrontation, close enough to intervene if necessary, but she found herself hesitating, fascinated by the professional quality of Sam's technique. As an instructor, she'd seen hundreds of pilots handle pressure, but never with this level of controlled competence. The facility's psychological evaluation protocols required all trainees to undergo background screenings, but Nash was beginning to suspect that Sam's file might not tell the complete story. The woman's responses were too precise, too professional, too controlled to come from standard civilian or even military pilot training. Dr. Walsh stepped closer to Captain Nash, speaking quietly. "Rebecca, we need to talk about this trainee after the situation is resolved. Her stress responses aren't normal. They're too controlled, too tactical. She's been through something that isn't in any standard training curriculum." Near the windows, two veteran helicopter pilots from different backgrounds were having a similar conversation. Chief Warrant Officer Mike Rodriguez, Army National Guard, and Lieutenant Commander Patricia Stone, Coast Guard, had both worked enough rescue operations to recognize elite-level training when they saw it. "Money says she's former military," Rodriguez whispered, "but not regular military. Look at how she's managing 4 threats simultaneously while maintaining legal and tactical superiority." Stone shook her head. "Military doesn't teach that level of precision. That's something else, something classified." Their speculation was interrupted as Garrett, seeing his friends immobilized with the same surgical efficiency as before, made a critical mistake. He decided to end the confrontation with brute force, lunging forward to grab Sam from behind. Sam's peripheral vision caught the movement before Garrett had taken his second step. Without releasing either Chase or Nolan, she shifted her weight and positioning in preparation for the incoming threat.
Eddie, watching from close range, saw the micro adjustments in her stance and knew exactly what was about to happen. "That boy has no idea what he just walked into," Eddie muttered, shaking his head in professional admiration. The room held its collective breath as Garrett closed the distance, his confidence absolute, despite the evidence right in front of him that this woman was far more dangerous than she appeared. What happened next would shatter every assumption that trainees had made about their quiet new classmate and transform the entire dynamic of the training program. Sam Rivers was about to show them exactly what 50 impossible rescues had taught her about handling multiple threats in confined spaces.
Garrett's approach was telegraphed and clumsy, the kind of move that worked in bar fights against untrained opponents. Sam released both men simultaneously, pivoting with fluid grace that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Garrett found himself grasping empty air as she slipped under his reaching arms. A heartbeat later, his legs were swept from beneath him, and he crashed to the floor with bone-jarring impact that shook nearby tables. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent common area like a gunshot. Coffee cups rattled on tables, and several pilots involuntarily stepped backward as they processed what they'd just witnessed. Garrett Stone, a former police helicopter pilot who outweighed Sam by at least 60 pounds, lay sprawled on the floor, staring up at the ceiling lights while trying to process what had just happened. Nolan, freed but still nursing his wrist, made the mistake of swinging a wild haymaker at Sam's head. She caught his fist in midair, redirected his momentum, and used his own force to send him stumbling backward into a table. Trays clattered to the floor as Nolan struggled to regain his balance, his face a mask of confusion and growing fear. Chase, realizing the situation had spiraled completely out of control, decided to end it with brute force. He charged forward with his full body weight, intending to tackle Sam to the ground where his size advantage would matter most. Sam didn't retreat or brace for impact. Instead, she stepped forward to meet his charge using his momentum against him, with a hip throw that sent Chase sailing through the air. He landed hard on his back, the breath knocked from his lungs, staring up at the ceiling lights while trying to process what had just happened. Logan, who had been hanging back and filming, found himself face to face with Sam as she turned her attention to him. The predatory focus in her eyes made him drop his phone, the device clattering to the floor as his hands shook uncontrollably. "I think you have enough footage," Sam said, quietly. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 40 seconds. 4 confident male pilots now lay scattered around the common area, Chase gasping for breath on his back, Nolan clutching his wrist while leaning against an overturned table, Garrett groaning on the floor, and Logan backing away with his hands raised in surrender. Sam stood in the center of the chaos, her breathing barely elevated, her flight jacket barely wrinkled. She looked down at Chase, who was struggling to sit up, and spoke in the same calm tone she'd maintained throughout the encounter. "I asked you to move," she said simply. The common area erupted in chaos as the reality of what they'd witnessed began to sink in. Phones buzzed with notifications as videos were uploaded and shared. Voices rose in excited conversation, with some pilots cheering and others expressing shock and disbelief. Iris Chang was on her feet, a huge grin spreading across her face. For the first time since arriving at the facility, she'd seen someone stand up to the bullies who made life miserable for anyone they perceived as weak. Her friend Marcus grabbed her arm, both of them staring at Sam with newfound respect and admiration. "Did you see that throw?" Iris whispered excitedly. "That was textbook perfect. My father taught me that same technique, but I've never seen anyone execute it that flawlessly under pressure." Captain Nash finally reached the scene, her instructor training kicking in as she assessed the situation. 4 male pilots were down, 1 female pilot stood unharmed in the center, and dozens of phones had recorded everything. The disciplinary implications would be significant, but first she needed to establish control. "Everyone back to your tables," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Put those phones away immediately." But even as the crowd began to disperse, the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. The quiet woman they'd all dismissed as unremarkable had just demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond anything they had expected from a fellow trainee. Eddie, still standing near his coffee station, shook his head in amazement. In 30 years of military service and civilian work around pilots, he had rarely seen such a perfect demonstration of controlled violence. Whoever this woman really was, she'd been trained by the best.
Dr. Walsh approached Captain Nash, her medical training focused on the aftermath of the confrontation. "Rebecca, I need to evaluate those 4 for injuries, but more importantly, we need to discuss Samantha Rivers immediately. What we just witnessed wasn't self-defense training. It was advanced tactical combat instruction." Hannah Kim was frozen near her table, watching her roommate with entirely new eyes. Sam's casual mention of emergency services work now seemed like the understatement of the century. Hannah had seen special operations teams in action during her Air Force service, and their movements had the same fluid precision Sam had just displayed. Emergency services. Right, and I'm a circus performer.
Near the windows, Chief Rodriguez and Lieutenant Commander Stone were analyzing what they'd witnessed with professional interest. "That hip throw was perfect," Rodriguez observed. "But did you see how she controlled the entire engagement? She let them escalate to physical contact first, documented their aggression, then neutralized all 4 threats without causing permanent damage. That's the kind of operational thinking they teach in very specific places." Stone nodded grimly. Places that don't officially exist. As Chase finally managed to sit up, holding his ribs and glaring at Sam with a mixture of rage and something that might have been fear, he had no idea that his humiliation was about to become the least of his problems. The woman who'd just dismantled him and his friends with surgical precision was carrying secrets that would soon turn his world upside down. Eddie walked over to where Sam stood, offering her a clean towel from his maintenance kit. "You okay, miss?" Sam accepted the towel with a nod, using it to wipe a small spot of blood from her knuckle. Nolan's, not hers. "Thank you, Eddie. Just a misunderstanding that got out of hand." Eddie studied her face, noting the complete absence of adrenaline response or emotional reaction. In 3 decades around military personnel, he'd never seen anyone remain so calm immediately after a physical confrontation. "That was some impressive misunderstanding," he said quietly. Sam met his eyes briefly, and Eddie saw something there that confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't a civilian pilot who'd gotten lucky. This was a professional who'd been holding back more than anyone realized. The confrontation was over, but its consequences were just beginning. As maintenance crews arrived to clean up the overturned furniture and Captain Nash began interviewing witnesses, word of the incident was already spreading beyond the facility through social media and phone calls to friends and family. Unknown to anyone in the room, one of those phone calls was going to Marcus Brennan, CEO of Brennan Flight Systems and Chase's father. The conversation would set in motion a chain of events that would expose secrets Sam had spent months trying to leave buried. Sam Rivers had won this battle with devastating efficiency, but the war for her new identity was about to begin. The aftermath of the confrontation buzzed with whispered conversations and sidelong glances as pilots slowly returned to their routines. Captain Nash had restored order, but the atmosphere remained charged with the electricity of witnessing something extraordinary. Sam calmly collected her spilled belongings and moved to an empty table near the windows, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred. Chase, Nolan, Garrett, and Logan had been escorted to the medical station for evaluation, though their injuries were more to their pride than their bodies. The precision of Sam's actions had been surgical enough to neutralize the threat without causing permanent damage. It was the kind of restraint that came from extensive training in the application of controlled force. At a corner table, a pilot named Kevin Park leaned close to his table mates. "Did anyone else notice how she moved?" he whispered urgently. "That wasn't lucky or random. That was professional-level combat training." His friend, Sarah Chen, nodded, pulling out her phone discreetly. "I've been doing some research since the incident. Look at this." She showed the screen to the group, displaying a partially redacted military forum post. Someone posted about a female special operations pilot who disappeared from active duty a few years ago. Call sign was Ghostwriter. The group leaned in closer, studying the blurry photograph attached to the post. The image quality was poor, but the stance and build were unmistakably similar to Sam's. "You think that's her?" Kevin asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah shrugged. The timeline fits. And did you see that patch on her jacket? Most of us assumed it was just random aviation insignia, but look closer next time. That's not standard civilian gear. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Across the room, Iris Chang was having her own revelations. Her father's military connections had taught her to recognize certain behavioral patterns, and everything about Sam's performance screamed elite operator. The way she'd controlled the situation, managed the legal implications, and executed flawless techniques spoke to training that went far beyond what any civilian pilot should possess. "She's not who she pretends to be," Iris whispered to Marcus. "Nobody moves like that without years of advanced training." Marcus frowned, glancing towards Sam's table. "What do you think she's doing here then? If she's already military trained, why would she be in civilian rescue training?" Iris had them wondering the same thing. There were programs for former military personnel to cross-train into different specializations, but Sam's skills suggested she'd already been at the top of whatever field she'd worked in. People usually don't step backwards in their careers unless circumstances forced them to. Eddie found himself studying Sam as he resumed his maintenance duties. His military experience had taught him to spot the subtle signs of psychological conditioning that came from sustained exposure to high-stress operations. The woman's unnatural calm under pressure, her precise tactical thinking, and her professional-level combat skills painted a picture of someone with extensive field experience. But what intrigued Eddie most was Sam's deliberate anonymity. She'd clearly been trained to blend in, to appear unremarkable until action was required. That kind of skill set belonged to people who worked in the shadows, handling missions that required invisibility as much as competence. In the administrative offices, Commander Lucas Grant was reviewing incident reports when Captain Nash knocked on his door. Rebecca entered with a thick file folder and a concerned expression that immediately put Grant on alert. "Sir, we have a situation with the common area incident," she began, setting the folder on his desk. "I've reviewed the phone footage from multiple angles, and we need to discuss Samantha Rivers' background immediately." Commander Grant looked up from his paperwork, noting the unusual tension in his subordinate's voice. "The pilot who defended herself against 4 male harassers? I assumed this was a standard disciplinary matter." Captain Nash shook her head, opening the folder to reveal several printed photographs. "Sir, these are frame-by-frame captures from the incident. Look at the techniques she employed, the precision of her movements, the tactical awareness she displayed." The commander examined the images, his expression growing more serious as he studied each one. The woman in the photos moved like someone with extensive combat training, her body positioning and technique execution far exceeding anything a civilian pilot should possess. "Have you reviewed her service record?" he asked. "That's where it gets complicated, sir." Rebecca pulled out a heavily redacted document. "Her file shows civilian rescue pilot status, but there are classification markings I can't access. And sir, there's this." She pointed to a faded patch visible in one of the photographs, a black helicopter silhouette against storm clouds barely discernible on Sam's jacket. Commander Grant's face went pale. He recognized that symbol, had seen it in briefings about units that officially didn't exist. "Get me her complete file immediately," he ordered. "And Rebecca, this conversation stays between us until I know what we're dealing with." Meanwhile, in the dormitory, Sam was meticulously organizing her gear when Hannah returned from her afternoon briefing. Hannah had heard about the common area incident through the facility's gossip network and was practically vibrating with questions. "Oh my God, Sam, everyone's talking about what you did to those jerks," Hannah said, throwing herself onto her bunk. "I can't believe you took down all 4 of them. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Sam continued organizing her flight gear without looking up. "Basic self-defense training. Everyone should know how to protect themselves." Hannah laughed. "Basic training doesn't cover whatever that was. People are saying you moved like some kind of special operations pilot or something." For the briefest moment, Sam's hands paused in their work.
Then she resumed organizing her flight gear with the same methodical precision, giving no indication that Hannah's words had any special meaning. But across the dormitory, several other pilots were listening to the conversation with growing interest. The woman who dismantled 4 aggressive males in under a minute was claiming her skills came from basic self-defense training. Either she was lying, or she had a very different definition of basic than everyone else. Dr. Walsh had spent the afternoon reviewing security footage from cameras positioned throughout the common area. The angles weren't perfect, but they captured enough to corroborate the phone recordings. More importantly, they revealed details that civilian observers had missed: the professional quality of Sam's movements, the tactical awareness she'd displayed, the restraint she'd shown despite clearly possessing the ability to inflict far more damage. Patricia had seen enough special operations personnel to recognize the signs. Sam Rivers was no ordinary pilot, and her presence in the program raised questions that demanded immediate answers. She was heading to Commander Grant's office to discuss her findings when her phone buzzed with an urgent message. The text was from her contact at Military Intelligence, a terse warning that made her blood run cold. Brennan Flight Systems making inquiries about Ghostwriter, situation compromised. Patricia broke into a run toward Commander Grant's office, knowing that whatever protection Sam's anonymity had provided was about to evaporate. The careful cover that had allowed a decorated veteran to seek a fresh start was crumbling, and the consequences would extend far beyond one woman's personal struggle. In his private quarters that evening, Commander Grant sat at his desk with Sam's complete file spread before him. The documents he'd finally gained access to painted a picture that explained everything and raised even more questions. Samantha Rivers wasn't just a civilian pilot seeking rescue training. She was a decorated special operations veteran whose discharge had been classified at the highest levels. The question was, what was someone with her background doing in civilian training? And what did her presence mean for his facility?
Commander Grant's hands trembled slightly as he read through Samantha Rivers' classified file. Each page revealed layers of a career that officially didn't exist. Operations in countries the government couldn't acknowledge, missions that had saved lives while remaining forever secret. The woman currently sleeping in the trainee dormitory had been one of the most effective special operations pilots in recent military history. But her discharge papers told a different story. Classified circumstances, medical evaluation pending, and administrative reassignment were bureaucratic phrases that concealed a more troubling truth. Someone with Sam's capabilities and record didn't simply transition to civilian training without serious underlying reasons. The commander reached for his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 5 years. The voice that answered belonged to General Patricia Knox, his former commanding officer, and one of the few people with clearance high enough to discuss Sam's situation. "Lucas, I was wondering when you'd call," General Knox said without preamble. "I assume you've discovered what you're dealing with. Patricia, what is Ghostwriter doing in my training program, and why wasn't I briefed when she arrived?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for Grant to wonder if the connection had been lost. Finally, General Knox spoke, her voice carrying the weight of difficult decisions. "She requested the assignment, Lucas. After what happened in Afghanistan, she needed somewhere to transition back. Your program was deemed the safest option for everyone involved." The commander felt a chill run down his spine. The Afghanistan operation had been classified above his clearance level, but he'd heard whispers about a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong, resulting in the loss of an entire special operations team except for one survivor. "How bad was it?" he asked quietly. "Bad enough that she hasn't flown a combat mission in 2 years, General Knox replied. The medical board recommended intensive therapy and gradual reintegration into aviation. We thought your program would provide structure without the pressure of active operations." The commander looked at the photographs from the common area incident again, seeing them in a new light. Sam's precise movements weren't just professional competence. They were the reflexes of someone who'd survived situations where hesitation
meant death. "The 4 pilots she engaged," he continued, "do they pose any security risk?" "That depends on what they do with the knowledge they're inevitably going to acquire," the general responded. "Chase Brennan has been making phone calls to his father, who happens to be a defense contractor with connections throughout the military establishment. The situation is becoming complicated." Back in the dormitory, Sam lay awake on her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling as Hannah's quiet breathing indicated her roommate had fallen asleep hours ago. The confrontation in the common area had felt good. Too good. For months, she'd been suppressing the instincts and reflexes that had kept her alive through 17 classified operations. The moment Chase and his friends had surrounded her, those suppressed systems had roared back to life with frightening intensity. She could still feel the precise pressure points on Nolan's wrist, the exact angle needed to redirect Chase's momentum, the calculated force required to neutralize Garrett without permanent injury. The techniques had flowed from muscle memory so deep it felt like breathing, reminding her of who she'd been before Afghanistan changed everything. A soft rustling from across the dormitory caught her attention. Iris Jang was sitting up in her bunk, clearly unable to sleep as well. The young pilot had been watching Sam with curious eyes since the incident, her gaze holding a mixture of admiration and questions. Sam turned her head slightly, meeting Iris's eyes in the dim light filtering through the windows. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the decorated veteran hiding in plain sight, and the young woman who'd grown up fighting for respect in a male-dominated field. Iris mouthed the single word, "Thank you." Sam nodded once, then closed her eyes, pretending to sleep while her mind continued processing the implications of her actions. She'd broken cover, revealed capabilities that would inevitably raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The careful anonymity she'd maintained for months was crumbling, and she wasn't sure whether she felt relief or terror at the prospect. The next morning brought an unusual summons. Instead of reporting for regular training exercises, Sam was instructed to report to Commander Grant's office immediately after breakfast. As she walked across the compound, she noticed other pilots watching her with expressions ranging from awe to suspicion. Chase Brennan was nowhere to be seen, but Nolan Pierce stood near the equipment hangar with his arm in a sling, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. Their eyes met briefly as Sam passed, and she saw something in his expression that made her tactical awareness spike. This wasn't over.
Commander Grant's office was sparse and functional, decorated only with commendations and photographs from his 25-year career. He looked up as Sam entered, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. His expression was carefully neutral, but Sam's trained eye caught the subtle signs of stress, the tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed against his desktop. "Trainee Rivers," he began formally, "I've reviewed the incident from yesterday's meal period. I'd like to hear your account of the events." Sam's response was textbook perfect, factual, precise, and legally unassailable. She recounted the harassment, the escalation, and her defensive actions without embellishment or emotional coloring. As she spoke, Commander Grant studied her carefully, noting the professional quality of her report. "Your techniques were quite advanced for someone with civilian rescue background," he observed when she finished. "I've always been a quick learner, sir," Sam replied, her voice steady. Commander Grant opened her file folder, revealing the classified documents within. Sam's composure didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or resignation. "Ghostwriter," he said quietly. The sound of her operational call sign hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible distance. Sam had spent months trying to leave that identity behind, to become just another pilot seeking a fresh start. Now, sitting in the small office with her classified history spread across the desk, she realized how naive that hope had been. "Sir," she acknowledged simply. Commander Grant leaned back in his chair, studying the woman across from him with new understanding. "The question now is what happens next, Captain Rivers." The use of her real rank, not the manufactured civilian status she'd been assigned, felt like removing a heavy disguise she'd been carrying too long. "I don't know, sir," Sam admitted. And for the first time since arriving at the facility, her voice carried a note of uncertainty. Outside the office windows, the morning training exercises continued with their usual intensity. Pilots practiced emergency procedures and learned the basics of mountain rescue operations. But inside this office, two career military officers faced a decision that would determine whether Samantha Rivers's carefully constructed new life could survive the exposure of her past. The phone on Commander Grant's desk rang with the urgent tone reserved for priority communications, and both officers knew that whatever came next would change everything for everyone involved. The priority call that came through Commander Grant's secure line carried the weight of decisions made in rooms far above his clearance level. General Knox's voice was tense as she delivered news that would reshape the entire situation. "Lucas, we have a development. Brennan Flight Systems has filed a formal complaint with the Pentagon, claiming that placing an unstable former operator in civilian training constitutes a security risk. They're demanding Sam's immediate removal and a full investigation into her psychological fitness." Commander Grant's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. "General, with respect, Brennan's son was involved in the harassment incident that precipitated the situation. This feels like retaliation rather than legitimate security concerns." "I agree," General Knox replied, "but they have enough political connections to force a response. However, there's something else. The Defense Intelligence Agency has been monitoring Brennan Flight Systems for potential security violations. They're very interested in how the company obtained classified information about Ghostwriter." Sam, who had been listening to the conversation through the phone speaker, felt a familiar operational clarity settle over her thoughts. The situation had evolved beyond personal recovery into something that could impact national security. Her training kicked in as she began analyzing threat vectors and potential responses. "General," Sam interjected, "permission to speak freely." "Granted, Captain." "Brennan's inquiry into my background suggests access to classified databases that should be restricted. If they're willing to expose classified operators over a personal grudge, they represent a counterintelligence threat that extends beyond this incident." The line went quiet as General Knox considered the implications. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different tone, one that Sam recognized from pre-mission briefings. "Captain Rivers, are you prepared to assist in an investigation into Brennan Flight Systems' information-gathering methods?" Sam straightened in her chair, muscle memory responding to the familiar cadence of receiving operational orders. "Yes, ma'am." Commander Grant and Captain Nash exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing Sam's transformation from recovering veteran to active operator. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture, her expression, the focused intensity that seemed to charge the air around her. Meanwhile, across the training facility, Chase Brennan was making a phone call that would escalate the situation beyond anyone's expectations. His father had instructed him to document any further interactions with Sam, preferably with video evidence that could support their narrative of an unstable individual posing a threat to other pilots. Chase gathered Nolan, Garrett, and Logan in a secluded area behind the maintenance hangars. His ribs were still sore from the previous day's encounter, but his desire for revenge outweighed any physical discomfort. "My father says we need more evidence of her being unstable," Chase explained to his friends. "He's got connections at the Pentagon who can get her kicked out permanently, but we need to provoke another incident." Nolan flexed his bandaged wrist, his expression eager. "I'm definitely up for round 2. She got lucky yesterday, caught us off guard, won't happen again." Garrett cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the nearby buildings. 4 against 1. We should be able to handle one crazy woman. Logan, who had been the least involved in the original confrontation, showed some hesitation. "What if she really is some kind of special forces? Those moves yesterday weren't normal." Chase's eyes hardened. "She's just a pilot like us. My father checked. There's no record of any advanced training in her file." It was a lie, but Chase believed his father's deliberately misleading information. Marcus Brennan had decided his son didn't need to know the full truth about what they were dealing with.
Back in Commander Grant's office, the conversation with General Knox had evolved into a complex operational briefing. Sam's role was shifting from protected veteran to active intelligence asset, tasked with helping expose potential security violations by Brennan Flight Systems. The investigation will require you to maintain your current cover while documenting any attempts by Brennan operatives to gather information about your background. We suspect they've been selling classified intelligence to foreign buyers using their military contracts as cover. Sam nodded, her training automatically cataloging the mission parameters. What's the timeline, General? 72 hours. We need evidence of their information-gathering methods before they can destroy whatever systems they're using. Captain Nash interrupted as her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Sir, I'm receiving reports of a potential confrontation developing near the maintenance hangars. Chase Brennan and his associates are moving toward the pilot training areas.
Sam was already standing, her operational instincts fully engaged. They're not done with yesterday's incident. Commander Grant reached for his radio, but Sam held up a hand. Sir, if this is connected to the larger investigation, we might want to see what they're planning before intervening. It was a calculated risk that could provide valuable intelligence about Brennan Flight Systems methods, but it also meant allowing a potentially dangerous confrontation to develop. Dr. Walsh had been monitoring the facility security cameras when she noticed the unusual movement patterns. 4 male pilots moving in formation toward an area where Sam Rivers was conducting routine equipment checks. It looked suspiciously like a coordinated approach. She immediately contacted Captain Nash. Rebecca, I'm seeing what appears to be a planned confrontation developing in Sector 7. Based on the movement patterns and the participants involved, this isn't spontaneous. Eddie Morales was performing routine maintenance on a helicopter when he spotted the 4 men approaching Sam's position. His military experience immediately recognized the tactical formation they were using. This wasn't a casual encounter. They were hunting. Miss Rivers, he called out, moving quickly toward her position, you might want to know that Chase Brennan and his friends are heading your way, and they don't look like they're coming to apologize. Sam looked up from the aircraft maintenance manual she'd been studying, her tactical awareness immediately shifting into high alert mode. She scanned the surrounding area, automatically noting escape routes, potential weapons, and defensive positions. How many, Eddie? She asked quietly, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who'd handled far worse situations. All 4 of them. And Eddie hesitated, then continued, Miss, I don't know what your real background is, but yesterday told me you know how to handle yourself. These boys are planning something, and I don't think it's going to end with just words. Sam nodded, processing the tactical situation. The maintenance hangar provided good defensive terrain, but also limited escape routes. If Brennan's group was planning to provoke another incident for documentation purposes, she needed to control the engagement to gather intelligence while protecting herself. Eddie, I need you to make sure no other pilots wander into this area in the next few minutes. And if you happen to have your phone ready to record what happens, that might be useful for everyone involved. Eddie studied her face and saw the same focused intensity he'd recognized in special operations personnel during his military service. Whatever was about to happen, this woman was prepared for it in ways that Chase Brennan and his friends couldn't possibly understand. The afternoon sun cast long shadows between the hangars as multiple forces converged on what would become the second confrontation that would define Sam's future at the facility.
Marcus Brennan's phone rang in his executive office overlooking the Seattle skyline, the caller ID displaying his son's number. As CEO of Brennan Flight Systems, Marcus was accustomed to solving problems with money, influence, and carefully applied pressure. His son's humiliating defeat at the hands of a female pilot was about to become a much larger problem than either of them realized. Chase, tell me you have something useful, Marcus said without preamble, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a defense contracting empire from nothing. We're moving into position now, Chase replied, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Logan's got his camera ready, and we've planned this better than yesterday. No way she gets lucky again. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, studying the classified documents spread across his desk. His inquiry into Samantha Rivers' background had yielded far more than he'd expected, and far less than he needed. The woman who'd embarrassed his son was a ghost in the system, her real identity buried under classification levels that suggested involvement in operations that, officially, never happened. "Son, I need you to understand something," Marcus said carefully. "The woman you're dealing with isn't what she appears to be. Be very careful how you approach this." But the connection was already deteriorating as Chase moved deeper into the hangar complex. Marcus stared at his phone, a cold dread settling in his stomach as he realized his son was walking into a situation he couldn't possibly understand. What Chase didn't know was that his father's investigation into Sam's background had triggered automatic security protocols at the Defense Intelligence Agency. For the past 18 months, the DIA had been building a case against Brennan Flight Systems for selling classified military technology to foreign buyers. Marcus Brennan's sudden interest in a classified operative had moved him from person of interest to active threat. In a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., DIA analyst Jennifer Chen was monitoring real-time communications intercepts from Brennan Flight Systems. The company's electronic surveillance had revealed a pattern of intelligence gathering that extended far beyond legitimate business interests. "Director Morrison," Jennifer called across the operations center. "Brennan just made contact with his operative at the training facility. They're moving to provoke another incident with our asset." Director Morrison, a veteran of 30 years in intelligence operations, studied the intercepted communications with growing concern. "Are people in position to document whatever happens next?" "Yes, sir. We've got full surveillance coverage of the facility, and Captain Rivers is equipped with recording equipment. Whatever Brennan's people do next, we'll have evidence." Back at the training facility, Sam had positioned herself strategically in the maintenance hangar, using the aircraft and equipment to create defensive advantages while ensuring multiple camera angles would capture whatever confrontation was coming. Her earpiece crackled with updates from the DIA Operations Center. "Ghost Rider, this is Control," came the familiar voice of her former handler. "4 subjects approaching your position from the east. Subject 1 is carrying recording equipment. Subject 2 appears to be coordinating with external parties via phone." Sam acknowledged with a subtle nod, her training automatically shifting into operational mode. This wasn't just about defending herself anymore. She was gathering evidence that could expose a network of defense contractors selling classified military information to hostile foreign governments. Chase and his 3 companions approached the hangar with the confidence of men who believed they held all the advantages. They had numbers, they had a plan, and most importantly, they had his father's assurance that the woman they were confronting posed no real threat. "Remember," Chase said quietly as they neared the hangar entrance, "we need her to throw the first punch. Logan, make sure you get everything on camera. My father's Pentagon contacts need clear evidence that she's unstable." Nolan cracked his knuckles, his bandaged wrist a reminder of yesterday's humiliation. "This time, we don't give her a chance to use whatever tricks she pulled yesterday." But as they entered the hangar, Eddie Morales stepped out from behind a helicopter, his maintenance coveralls and clipboard giving him the perfect cover for surveillance. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Something I can help you with?" Garrett pushed past Eddie without acknowledgement. "We're looking for Samantha Rivers. We have some business to finish." Eddie's weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes tracked every movement as the 4 men spread out through the hangar. He'd served in enough combat zones to recognize when a situation was about to explode, and his military instincts told him these young men had no idea what they were walking into. Sam emerged from behind a maintenance station carrying a flight manual and appearing completely absorbed in her studies. The transformation from operational readiness to casual civilian was so smooth that even Eddie, who knew to watch for it, barely caught the transition.
"Chase," she said calmly, looking up from her manual, "I thought you might still be in medical, getting checked out from yesterday." Chase's face flushed red at the casual dismissal of his injuries. "We need to talk. Away from the cameras this time." Sam glanced around the hangar, noting the obvious recording devices Logan was positioning. "I count at least 3 cameras in here, but I suppose that's fine. What did you want to discuss?" The casual way she acknowledged the surveillance cameras while maintaining complete composure unnerved Logan.
who was beginning to suspect this confrontation wasn't going according to plan. In his earpiece, Chase heard his father's voice crackling with static. "Son, abort this operation. Get out of there now. I've learned things about this woman that change everything." But the signal was weak, and Chase's anger overrode his caution. He stepped closer to Sam, his three friends forming the same tactical formation they'd used the day before. "Yesterday was a fluke," Chase announced, speaking clearly for the cameras. "Today you're going to learn what happens when you assault fellow pilots." Sam set down her manual with deliberate precision, her movements carrying the fluid grace that had marked yesterday's confrontation. But this time, her responses would serve a dual purpose: protecting herself while gathering evidence that would expose a defense contracting conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the Pentagon. "I'm listening," she said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone that made Eddie take several steps backward. What none of the four men realized was that their confrontation was being monitored by intelligence agencies, recorded by multiple surveillance systems, and analyzed in real time by specialists who understood exactly what Brennan Flight Systems had been doing with classified military information. The hangar fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of helicopters conducting training exercises. Chase and his friends were about to learn that some battles extend far beyond personal revenge, and that the quiet woman they'd been tormenting was connected to forces they couldn't comprehend. Sam Rivers had spent 2 years trying to leave her operational life behind, but Marcus Brennan's investigation into her background had made that impossible. Now, standing in a maintenance hangar with 4 angry men approaching her, she was about to become an active intelligence operative again, whether she wanted to or not. The tension in the hangar was electric as Chase stepped forward, his father's desperate warnings lost in the static of poor reception and his own burning need for revenge. Logan positioned his camera to capture what he believed would be evidence of Sam's instability, while Nolan and Garrett flanked her position with the confidence of men who thought they'd learned from yesterday's mistakes. "This ends today," Chase announced, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Yesterday you caught us off guard, but today we're ready for your little karate tricks." Sam's earpiece crackled with updates from the DIA Operations Center. "Ghost Rider, we're recording everything. Subjects are carrying multiple recording devices, likely coordinating with external parties. Maintain defensive posture until they initiate physical contact." "Copy, Control," Sam whispered, so quietly that only the most sensitive surveillance equipment could detect her acknowledgement. Eddie had positioned himself near the hangar entrance, ostensibly continuing his maintenance work, but actually serving as both witness and early warning system. His military experience told him this confrontation would be different from yesterday's spontaneous incident. This was planned, coordinated, and far more dangerous. Nolan made the first move, stepping forward with his unbandaged hand extended in what appeared to be a peaceful gesture. "Look, Sam, we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. Maybe we can work this out like adults." But as he spoke, Garrett was moving to cut off her escape route to the rear exit, while Nolan continued filming from an angle that would make any defensive action appear aggressive. Sam's tactical awareness cataloged every movement, every positioning, every potential threat vector. "I'm always willing to talk," Sam replied calmly, her voice carrying clearly to all recording devices. "What did you want to discuss?" Chase pulled out his phone, making a show of checking messages while actually activating its recording function. "My father's been asking questions about your background. Interesting what he's been finding." The statement was intended to provoke a reaction, to create evidence of suspicious behavior that could support their narrative. What Chase didn't realize was that every word was being analyzed by DIA specialists who understood exactly what Brennan Flight Systems had been doing with classified information. "Your father sounds like a thorough man. What kind of questions has he been asking?" In the DIA Operations Center, Director Morrison leaned forward as the conversation took a crucial turn. "She's doing exactly what she should,
getting them to incriminate themselves on camera. Logan stepped closer with his phone camera, emboldened by what he interpreted as Sam's passive response. Must be frustrating, having people dig into your past, especially when you're trying so hard to hide who you really are. Sam's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made Eddie take a half step toward the confrontation. He'd seen that look before, the moment when a professional operator decided that talking was over. "I'm not hiding anything," Sam said quietly, "but it sounds like your friend's father might be." The statement hit its target perfectly. Chase's face flushed with anger at the implied criticism of his father, while Logan's camera captured his emotional reaction. In intelligence terms, they were providing evidence of their own coordination with external parties. Garrett decided to escalate the situation physically, reaching out to grab Sam's shoulder. "Maybe you should show some respect when you're talking about people who matter." The moment his hand made contact, Sam's training took over. But this time, her response was calculated not just for self-defense, but for maximum intelligence value. She controlled Garrett's arm with precision that demonstrated advanced combat training while speaking clearly for all recording devices. "I am defending myself against physical assault by multiple individuals. This is the second coordinated attack by these same individuals in 2 days." Nolan lunged forward, trying to capitalize on what he thought was Sam's distraction with Garrett. Instead, he found himself controlled and neutralized with the same surgical precision she'd displayed the day before. But now, her actions served dual purposes: protection and evidence gathering. Chase, seeing both his friends immobilized, made a critical error. He pulled out his father's business card and waved it at the cameras. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Brennan Flight Systems has contracts throughout the Pentagon. We can end your career with a phone call." In the DIA Operations Center, analysts exchanged glances as Chase provided perfect evidence of his family's abuse of classified access for personal vendettas. Logan, still filming, made his own mistake. "This is all going straight to my father's contacts at Defense Intelligence. They'll want to know about unstable operators hiding in civilian programs."
Director Morrison smiled grimly as Logan inadvertently confirmed the intelligence network that Brennan Flight Systems had been using to gather classified information. Sam's response was precisely calibrated for maximum intelligence value. "I'd be very interested to know how civilian contractors obtained classified information about military personnel. That sounds like a serious security violation." The statement triggered exactly the reaction she'd anticipated. Chase, angry and off balance, began detailing his father's Pentagon connections and access to classified databases, providing a complete confession of the very activities the DIA had been investigating. Eddie watched in professional admiration as Sam controlled 4 attackers while simultaneously conducting an intelligence operation. Her questions prompted increasingly incriminating responses, while her defensive actions demonstrated the exact level of training that made her valuable to agencies that officially didn't exist. Captain Nash arrived with facility security just as Sam was securing the last of the evidence. The 4 men lay scattered around the hangar, not seriously injured, but thoroughly controlled and completely exposed. "Captain Rivers," Nash said formally, acknowledging Sam's true rank for the first time in front of witnesses, "I believe you have something for us." Sam removed a micro-recorder from her flight jacket, along with several phones she'd confiscated during the confrontation. Full documentation of conspiracy to misuse classified information, abuse of Pentagon access, and coordination between Brennan Flight Systems and unauthorized intelligence gathering. Chase struggled to sit up, his face a mask of confusion and growing fear. "What the hell is happening here? Who are you people?" Commander Grant emerged from the shadows where he'd been monitoring the situation. "Mr. Brennan, you and your associates are under investigation for conspiracy to compromise classified military personnel on behalf of a foreign intelligence operation." The words hit Chase like physical blows as he realized the magnitude of what he'd stumbled into. His father's instructions, which had seemed like simple revenge, were revealed as part of a complex espionage operation that had been under federal investigation for months. Logan's camera, still recording, captured the moment when 4 arrogant young men realized they'd been manipulated by forces far beyond their understanding. Their planned harassment of a female pilot had exposed a defense contracting conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. Eddie approached Sam as security personnel processed the evidence and detained the suspects. "Ma'am, I've got to say, that was the most professional operation I've witnessed in 30 years of service." Sam managed a small smile, the first genuine expression of satisfaction she'd shown in months. Sometimes the best way to catch people breaking the law is to let them do it while you're recording everything. The hangar that had been the site of a planned assault was now a crime scene that would provide evidence for prosecutions that would reshape defense contracting oversight for years to come. 3 weeks later, Samantha Rivers stood in Commander Grant's office for what would be their final official meeting. The investigation into Brennan Flight Systems had exposed a network of corporate espionage that reached into the highest levels of defense contracting, while her role in the operation had been classified at levels that ensured the public would never know the full story. "The Pentagon is very pleased with the outcome, Captain," Commander Grant said, reviewing the final report spread across his desk. "Brennan Flight Systems has been stripped of all government contracts, and Marcus Brennan faces federal charges for espionage and conspiracy. The intelligence networks they'd compromised have been secured, and several foreign operatives have been identified and neutralized." Sam nodded, but her attention was focused on the window overlooking the training compound, where new pilots continued their exercises, preparing for careers they couldn't fully imagine yet. Her own journey back from the darkness of Afghanistan had taken an unexpected path, but it had led her to a place where she could make a difference again. "What about the 4 trainees?" she asked. "Chase Brennan has been expelled and faces charges as an accessory to his father's operations. The other 3 have been given a choice: complete a comprehensive ethics and sensitivity training program, or face expulsion and potential criminal charges. Interestingly, all 3 chose the training program." Commander Grant leaned back in his chair, studying the woman who had transformed his facility in ways he was still processing. "The question now is what you want to do next, Captain. General Knox has made it clear that you can return to active special operations duty if that's your preference." Sam was quiet for a long moment, watching through the window as Iris Chang guided a young pilot through emergency landing procedures. The small woman who'd been inspired by Sam's example had become one of the program's standout trainees, her confidence growing daily as she mastered techniques that had once seemed impossible. "I'd like to stay, sir," Sam said finally. "Not as a trainee, but as an instructor. These pilots deserve to learn from someone who understands what they might face out there." Commander Grant smiled, understanding that some wounds heal not through isolation, but through service to others. "I was hoping you'd say that. We've been authorized to create a new position, Senior Flight Instructor for High-Risk Operations. The job comes with a significant increase in responsibilities and clearance levels." "What kind of responsibilities?" "Teaching advanced tactical flying, survival in hostile environments, and emergency rescue operations in conditions that would ground most pilots. Essentially preparing our graduates for the impossible rescues that happen when everything else has already failed." Sam felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over her thoughts. For 2 years, she'd been running from who she'd been, trying to forget the skills that had defined her career. Now she had the opportunity to use those same skills to prepare others for the challenges she'd survived. "I accept, sir." Eddie Morales knocked on the office door, entering with his usual weathered smile and a steaming cup of coffee. "Thought you might want to hear the latest from the rumor mill, Captain." Sam raised her eyebrow at the use of her real rank. Word of her true identity had spread through the facility, but rather than creating suspicion or fear, it had generated something she hadn't expected: respect and admiration from pilots who understood exactly what her background meant. The new class of trainees arrived yesterday, 24 pilots from various backgrounds, including 6 women. When they heard about what happened here, specifically about our legendary instructor who took down 4 bullies and exposed a spy ring, applications tripled. Dr. Welsh appeared in the doorway carrying a psychological evaluation report. Captain, I wanted to share the results of your final assessment. Your stress responses have normalized completely, and all indicators suggest successful reintegration into operational status. More importantly, your willingness to mentor other pilots shows a healthy processing of your Afghanistan experience. Sam accepted the report, but her attention was drawn to activity outside the window. Hannah Kim was leading a group of new trainees through aircraft inspection procedures, her confidence and competence obvious even from a distance. Several of the new arrivals were female pilots, and I could see them looking to Hannah as a role model. It's amazing what happens when people have examples to follow, Dr. Welsh observed, following Sam's gaze. Your actions here have created a ripple effect that extends far beyond this facility. Captain Nash entered the office carrying training schedules and curriculum materials. Captain Rivers, I've been working on the Advanced Tactical Flying program. Given your background, I'd like your input on scenarios that simulate real-world emergency conditions.
Sam reviewed the proposed training exercises, her operational experience automatically identifying areas where the curriculum could be enhanced. We should add modules on flying in a hostile territory, emergency extractions under fire, and survival psychology for extended operations behind enemy lines. The suggestions came naturally, drawing on experiences that had once been too painful to discuss. Now, they were becoming tools for training the next generation of rescue pilots. Commander Grant watched the interaction with satisfaction. Captain, your first class of advanced students will include some familiar faces. Iris Chang specifically requested transfer to your program, along with several other pilots who were here during the incidents. What about the 3 who were involved in the harassment? Sam asked. Interesting development there, Rebecca Nash replied. Nolan Pierce, Garrett Stone, and Logan Webb have all completed their ethics training and submitted formal requests to join your advanced program. They want to learn from you. Sam considered this unexpected turn of events. The 3 men who'd participated in tormenting her now wanted her to train them in the most demanding aspects of rescue flying. It was either the ultimate irony or a genuine opportunity for redemption. Everyone deserves a second chance, she said finally. If they're serious about learning, I'm willing to teach them. Eddie nodded approvingly. That's the sign of a true professional, turning enemies into assets through superior character. Dr. Walsh smiled as she updated her files. Captain, you've achieved something remarkable here. You've transformed personal trauma into professional strength, created a positive example for future pilots, and contributed to national security. More importantly, you found a way to heal while helping others grow. As the meeting concluded and the various officers departed to their duties, Sam remained at the window overlooking the training compound. The facility that had been intended as a quiet refuge for her recovery had become the launching point for a new chapter in her career. Her phone buzzed with a text from Iris Chang. Captain, my first solo emergency simulation is scheduled for tomorrow. I know you'll be watching from the tower, and I just wanted you to know I'm going to make you proud. Sam smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced since before Afghanistan. She had spent 50 impossible rescues, saving other people's lives in conditions that should have been fatal. Now, she had the opportunity to train others who might save even more lives in situations she could only imagine. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound as pilots practiced emergency procedures and learned the skills that might one day save lives in conditions where failure meant death. Sam Rivers had found her way home, not by returning to who she'd been, but by becoming who she was meant to be.
The quiet woman who'd arrived months ago seeking anonymity and recovery had become the facility's most respected instructor, proof that sometimes the most powerful people are those who choose to use their strength to build others up rather than tear them down. Her story had become legend among the trainees. The pilot who'd flown 50 impossible rescues survived when her team didn't, and then used her skills to expose enemies and train heroes. But for Sam, the real victory wasn't in the missions she'd flown or the conspiracies she'd exposed. It was in the knowledge that every pilot she trained would carry her lessons into situations where lives hung in the balance, extending her ability to save people far beyond what any individual operator could achieve alone. She'd found a way to multiply her impact while healing the wounds that had brought her to this place. Samantha Ghost Rider Rivers had learned to fly again, not just aircraft, but into a future where her darkest experiences had become the foundation for her greatest contribution. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.